Hi, I'm Karen Hurt, and I'm here with our next edition of Live Asking for a Friend. And I am absolutely delighted today to have my friend Bill Treasurer on, who is really a kindred spirit in thinking about courage. And of course, we all know how important courage is during this time. Bill runs a company called Giant Leap Consulting. He's written some fantastic books, and he'll share with you some of that. Courage Goes to Work, Leaders Open Doors, The Leadership Killer. It's all about how do you show up with humility in the age of arrogance. So without further ado, I will bring Bill on, and we will have a wonderful conversation about courage.
Karen, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me to be on your show. I'm looking forward to it. We're live, so this one gets my heart going a little bit.
Yeah, I'm delighted to have this conversation. I know that we have been thinking about this for a while, that we are both so passionate about courage, and we take it from different angles and how important it would be to collaborate. So I'm glad that we're having an opportunity to finally do this. So the question, we always start with a question when we're talking about and asking for a friend. And this one it's been on the top of a conversation I've been having with so many senior leaders right now, which is, how do I have the courage to be vulnerable? Because we're all wanting to show up really strong for our teams, and yet it's been really interesting. I'm finding that a lot of it's when the leaders can actually be a little bit vulnerable, that is creating a safer space. So, Bill, what thoughts do you have around that?
The first thought is, isn't it wonderful that senior executives are wanting the information about this? Isn't it good that we're starting to equate courage with vulnerability instead of invulnerability? It means that we're dimensionalizing the idea of courage in a different way. I think the old model of leadership, that's sort of the old command and control, was that I had to be invulnerable for everyone else. And now we're recognizing that comes at a cost, that people see that as inauthentic. They see that as fakery, and they don't want to follow it. So they want a leader who has a degree of humility. I was recently, maybe about a year ago, I was on stage with a senior executive I've worked with for about 15 years, seasoned person, about 70 years old. And I asked him, what is some leadership attribute you appreciate more now that you didn't fully appreciate in the past, based on your seasoning, now that you've been at this leadership responsibility for such a long time? And he gave the word humility. He said, I wish that I had understood the importance of humility earlier on in my career, and that as time goes on, I'm more sure of the need for humility. And that impressed me. And I think that that's what you and I find in our conversations with senior executives, the importance of people knowing that you haven't gotten so dislodged from your humble roots that you remember where you came from, which is the people who were not senior executives. You came from that rank first before you went up to the rarefied air of the C-level executive offices. So people want to follow a leader who remembers where they came from, and humility has something to do with it.
Yeah. So, Bill, I'm really curious, how did you get so curious about this concept of courage and vulnerability? And how did you get to where you are and dedicate your life to working with people in this arena?
Yeah, so my story is a little kind of odd. It's taken, like so many other people, weird different paths and such. But part of my story, I would say the theatrics of my story, is that I wasn't a very good athlete growing up. But then at the local pool, I discovered springboard diving. One day with my friends, we were doing back jumps and back dives and stuff. And I pulled my legs around and did a backflip. And suddenly I could do something that my friends couldn't do. And it became my little sport, springboard diving. And I got good at it. And I got good on the low board. That's the 1 meter springboard. In fact, I'm from Westchester County in New York, and I won the Westchester County Diving Championships 3 times. And colleges eventually started to dangle scholarships in front of me. And they would ask me about my high board list of dives. And I didn't have a high board list of dives because I'm petrified, and I say that in the present tense, of heights. So decisions, a lot of times risk taking, which is sort of the physical application of courage, can even be the mental application of courage, but risk taking often involves a decision. Will I, won't I? Can I, can't I? Should I, shouldn't I? Get off this platform of safety, whatever it may be. So at that point, a coach held me accountable to my own potential, believed in me long enough to help me believe in myself. And through a small, slow, incremental process of encountering greater heights and encountering greater fear, helped me become uncomfortable with discomfort, or helped me become comfortable with discomfort. And I acquired a high board list of dives. So, and it was all about me facing my own courage and activating my own courage and facing fear and moving to discomfort. And it was such a redeeming experience. I got a full scholarship to college as a result of it. It paid for my education.
Nice.
And as I continued to progress after college, I thought, this topic, this idea, this, from the work that you do with David and in your company, Let's Grow Leaders, that when you're in a person's courageous moment, it's a drama moment of their life or their career. It's a really significant, impactful, super important moment, this decision making of getting off this platform of safety, whatever it may be, to face discomfort. And I thought, as I started my company, Giant Leap Consulting, is that moment so important that maybe there's a business that could be built around that moment and helping people take whatever metaphorical high dives they might be facing?
Oh, that's so interesting. It's been since COVID, we have been having these conversations with people and asking them to tap into their past moments of courage. And so we've, in all these workshops, we say, what has been the most courageous moment of your career? And the reason we're doing that is because it helps them to think back to a past moment, and because that's what builds confidence that you could do it in the future. And what are the values that were at play there? And one of the interesting things is people are often saying to us, in hindsight, I recognize it was courageous, but it didn't feel particularly courageous at the time. I was just doing the thing that I had to do. Like I had to stand up for my values. Do you find that as you're dissecting into people's moments of courage?
Yeah. So first of all, I love your book, Courageous Cultures. And it asks really great questions like you're asking your audiences. And similarly, I ask that same question to audiences that I work with. And what you're pointing out is actually also what traditionally heroes point out. When you interview heroes, they never recognize themselves as a hero. Like Sully landing on the Hudson, in New York. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He, like so many other people who run into a burning building and such, they say the most common refrain that you'll hear is, I just did what any other person would do, even though you and I know, no, not so many other people would actually do that. But it seems to them, it doesn't feel like a courageous moment when they're in it. They're doing the thing that's the right thing to do, although it's the hard thing to do. But it's a really essential conversation to have.
Mm-hmm. When you think about vulnerability, I'm working with a really fantastic leader. And he's wrestling with, I want to make it safe for my team. I want my team to bring me their issues. I want to understand what's going on, but he wants to show up real strong for his team. And we're not seeing that level of vulnerability. What would you say to him if you were coaching him? How would you get him to start? Because, it may not be the giant leap into massive vulnerability. It probably starts with trying it in baby steps. So how do you coach somebody through that for whom that does not feel natural?
I'd probably start with a conversation about, tell me what invulnerability looks like, and in what ways does invulnerability serve you? And I want to understand why that they're adhesed to that concept. And then I'd pivot it to what might it be costing you? And think of people that you thought came off as quote unquote invulnerable, and what did you find distasteful about that? I would sort of have that conversation first. Then I think about, I've done some work, as you know, my book, The Leadership Killer, I wrote with a Navy SEAL, and he led all SEAL teams, including DevGru. And DevGru is, the secret word for SEAL Team 6. And he said the importance of walking the deck plate When you're an officer in the Navy and in the SEALs, you're up at the bridge a lot, looking out into the future and what's coming out on the horizon. But people can start to look up to you if you never come off the bridge and walk the deck plates as somebody who might think they're a little too special, right? And so it's important to have the loyalty of your team. And he talks about going down and walking the deck plates. For one, that's where you get the real information about what's going on in your organization. Simply listening to your people, if you're in a leadership role, instead of feeling like you have to do all the directing, all the telling, all the talking, stop, bite your tongue, ask a juicy question, and let the intake valve work. People will give you really excellent information, super good ideas that will keep you from making bad decisions. So asking good questions, walking the deck plate, listening more than you speak. Those are 3 really quick things that any leader can do. I would say even try that as a technique, before anything else.
Yeah. If you are a leader of leaders, I was listening to Dov Barron's podcast the other day. And one of the things that was interesting, a question he was asking one of his guests is, what do you do if you're the leader of leaders? So you've got managers working for you and you are trying to build trust and connection and you're wanting people to bring more of themselves and to be a little more revealing so you can build that trust. But you got the one guy who's like the super high performer who's not going to go there. And I thought, this is a really good question. I'm going to ask Bill that question. What would you do then?
Yeah, that is a good question. What's coming up for me is I remember a strategic planning offsite that I facilitated once. It was a 3-day offsite in the North Georgia mountains. And my company had done a lot of pre-research. We had interviewed all of the senior executives that were going to be at the strategy session. And one sort of surprising thing that came out is that the CEO himself, who was younger than everyone else, was really obnoxious. And people didn't feel, and you know the term, and you know how important it is to courage, people didn't feel psychologically safe around this guy because of how temperamental and explosive he was. And this idea that he had to be the hard-charging leader. And in the session, after the first day, when we had done some things to help disarm people and such, and then I showed the information yielded from these one-on-one interviews and some other surveys that we had done, it came out that people didn't trust him. And he did what he always does. He exploded. And he said, how? And he was a French guy. Just happened. That's just, part of the reality of the story. And he said, how can you not trust me? I tell you everything all the time. So honest. I am brutally honest. My honesty helps you because I am brutality in my honesty. How can you say you don't trust me when I tell you everything? I'm so transparent. And then one of the older seasoned guys who had already made his money in a tech company, so he felt less afraid than the other senior executives there, called him on it. And he said, dude, that's exactly why we don't feel psychologically safe around you. What you did just now is the reason that we don't feel safe around you. Yeah, you're honest, but you're honest with brutality to the point that it makes us all bite our tongue. It was an honest moment. I didn't know what was going to happen next as facilitator. I was afraid. He digested it. We called for a break. And when he came back, he acknowledged that he never really fully understood the connection between what he thought was good, solid honesty. And in actuality, he had created an unsafe environment where people no longer trusted him. It was an epiphany moment in front of, 11 other people. And sometimes it takes that moment of humiliation. I mean, we get humility. Think of the bigger word, humiliation. Oftentimes, that's how we get that little word, humility, unfortunately. But, we learn from psychological spankings sometimes.
I think about one of the biggest lessons that I learned around this. And, early on, my heart was in the right place. I thought, I want to be so humble as a leader that I am going to check in and I'm going to care about you. I want to learn about your children, your family, but I'm not going to share about me because I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about you. For some reason, I thought that is what servant leadership meant. And someone came to me and said, the thing is, all about us, but we don't know anything about you. I don't trust you, right? And that was a massive awakening, because I think, and I see this show up for folks. They're like, I just want it to be about the people, but relationship requires is a give and take of both sides. I want to unpack. Really, I like to get really practical for folks. That's what we're all about here, is really practical. So I want to paint a picture of when you see people doing this well, leaders doing this well, when they're showing up with this confident humility, they're having the courage to be vulnerable. What does that look like? And then I'm also going to ask you to answer Morel's question, which is cultural differences are real. That's a big challenge. So we can also talk about the cultural differences. I want to share with you the person that I saw do this best since COVID. And then I wonder if you, and so then I'd love to see some examples of you, tactically, what does it look like? And then we'll come to Morel's question. We were working with a large tech company, and he was running his global conference. And it was a conference that normally everyone would have flown in to, from all over the world. So it was a big deal. And he had done it all virtually, but he was trying to recreate that level of intimacy that would have happened had they all been face to face. And he did what I thought was the best example I have seen so far of this. He looked straight into the green dot, as we say. And he said, here's the thing. We're going to be working on some strategic initiatives, and this is going to be a very important time for us. But before we start, I want to share with you a little bit about what I've been dealing with. And he said, I've been dealing with this since China. When the virus first started, and it was in China, and as a global team, I thought, oh my goodness, we're going to have to really rally and help our China teams, right? What can we do? And I was working, round the clock to try to support them. And I'm neck deep in that. And now we're in Italy. And now I'm dealing with this thing in Italy. And oh no, now it's here in the United States. And I'm still dealing with, right? And during this time, I was working so hard, and I was so worried about our people, and I am so tired. And my husband, so vulnerable, right? My husband is at home dealing with our small children. And I feel immense guilt because I am not able to be there. And they were just exposed at daycare to COVID. And I've got that burden. And I just want to say, I know this is the context that any of the work that we're going to do over the next couple of days is in this context. I know that's my story. I know every one of you has a story. I know some of you have lost parents, right? And then he went through scenarios that he knew that had happened on the team. So please know that my first priority is to care for you. Mm-hmm. Do you think they had a lot of creativity on how to sell? Oh my gosh, right? You could have heard a virtual pin drop. But he went first. Right. And then throughout the conference, then he brought people on one at a time, just like, it was a big group, but he would bring one. Please come. Bill, would you please join me on camera? And he gave people a warning when he was going to do this. He said, what has been your biggest source of strength during this time? And the stories that emerged from that conversation, right? And so now he's been vulnerable. Other people are being vulnerable. And even with people joining virtually all over the world, he is having this beautiful moment. Yeah. So, what advice would you have for people who say, yeah, I want to do it, but what does that look like? What have you seen are some great examples?
Well, I love that story that you just shared. And you and I, was interesting when Winning Well was coming out, and one of my books, I think it was Leadership Kick in the Butt. Leadership Kick in the Butt. When both those books came out, we both keyed in on this concept of confident humility, right? That we look for leaders who have confidence. We want a confident leader, but we don't want an arrogant leader. We don't want a conceited leader. We want a strong leader who's confident, and we want to make sure that they haven't lost sight of their roots, that they have humility, and that they're willing to listen to us and hear our ideas. So, which takes a certain comfort in one's skin. I love the story you just shared. One of the concepts I talk about in Courage Goes to Work is leadership by jumping first. LBJF, leadership by jumping first, right? And this person jumped first And by doing that and sort of acknowledging the tension in the room and how it was playing out in their own life and their own career, it disarmed everybody else, which creates openness for them to want to move into that space, which is, sort of brilliant, right? What I remember, I'll tell you, I had a guy that I worked for at Accenture. His name is Heinz Brannon, still a bit of a mentor to me. And Heinz, we had there were he had like 35 partners that were reporting to them, all a little bit uptight, all, type A, results-driven people, and, all full of anxiety and such. But Heinz was always very comfortable in his skin. He knew who he was as an individual. He was a very principled, value-based leader, and he wouldn't freak out in the way that they often did if something wasn't going right or the result wasn't being gotten in the right way. He had composure, and composure goes a long way in creating, psychological safety for others. And I remember one time we had we were leading the largest outsource engagement at that time in the history of the world. And we were managing 700 IT applications for a company called Bell South, which is now part of AT&T. And as we were managing that, we were now assuming over 2,000 Bell South employees were going to become Accenture employees.
Oh, wow.
And so to win their hearts and minds, we took the top leaders and we went to New Orleans with them. And we had dignitary after dignitary from Accenture stand up there with suits on, telling them how wonderful it's going to be now that you're part of the culture and stuff. But Heinz was really wise. He's like, you know what? That's only going to play so far. That may work with our own Accenture employees, but the people that are now coming over, they need to hear people who have had their experience. He was wise enough to bring somebody else who had been outsourced 3 years ago from their company and had come over to Accenture, who was not in a suit, who was dressed like they were in the audience, and said, here's where I am. I went through the same anxiety. You said Accenture, I said Gesundheit. I didn't know who they were. And you probably have this fear and you probably have this concern. I had the same thing, but I'm here to tell you after my transition and journey, I'm glad I've gone through this process. That person was so disarming, and that it allowed people to stop sitting like this with suspicion. And it was Heinz Brannon who had the insight to bring that person in like that and not feel that it was some threat to his leadership, because it wasn't. It advanced that process.
Good. I love that. Okay. So cultural differences are real. And this level of vulnerability does vary across that. And that is a big challenge. I know you work, Bill, I know you work all over the world and you have seen this. So how do you see it play out, and how do you be sensitive to the cultural differences that you're seeing here?
Yeah. Wow. It's a good question. You and I know that this stuff is not easy.
Right.
The best we can do is, give tips that might increase your probability of success. We can't guarantee it. I can remember having a conversation after a courage workshop in Japan, and it was right after Fukushima, and the limo driver taking me to the airport wanted to know about courage. And he was telling me how surprised, how common it was for people to sort of bite their tongue in Japan and in other Asian countries because you don't want to speak up to authority. Mm-hmm. Whereas had Fukushima happened in the United States or Australia, for example, there'd be people, protesting in the streets. But in Japan, they were rather subdued initially when Fukushima happened because they don't want to question authority. It's seen as disrespectful. Mm-hmm. So it is a reality. And some societies are what we would call an honor society. Mm-hmm. And they take great pride in and don't want their leadership questioned because they feel like they were chosen for this position because of the wisdom that they have. Mm-hmm. So having a person, I'll tell you, for me and others, I still find good value in a 360-degree feedback. If you can walk through a process like that with people in every culture, where they can get unassailable data as part of a healthy outlook on improving their leadership effectiveness, it can be eye-opening and enlightening to the point that it brings about leadership changes. One of my favorite quotes is from Mahatma Gandhi. He said, "The truth only hurts if it should." Sometimes it's okay for the truth to hurt if it startles you into some behavioral change that will help you and help you be more effective with others. sometimes a 360 can still be effective at doing that, regardless of culture.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I'm a huge believer in 360s, whether it's something you go and do the interviews. I'm having a conversation at 12:30 where I'm giving someone the feedback after I went and interviewed all his direct reports, right? So it's a really important way to do it, or the formal 360s. I think for me, what we found is it's you knowing what success looks like in that culture. So, and David is saying one way to help with courage in collective cultures or honor societies is to help people see courage as contributing to the collective or to the honor. It doesn't have to look like it does in the Western cultures. Absolutely. We certainly found that in our work in Southeast Asia. What success looks like is helping your boss to save face. But what you can do with that, how can you help, is by speaking up so that person has more information and framing it in that way. So David, I know you're really passionate about that, and you teach that well. So thank you for sharing that. Good. So Morel,
that reminds me too, is, a lot of people will be like, how do I give upward feedback to my boss? And I very often start from that same place, is start with your boss's goals, because that's what's important to them.
Right.
And if you can help them understand how their own behavior is becoming blockage to their goal that they see as important, then they're going to pay attention. Rather than, here's what won't work. Pointing your finger in somebody's face saying you need to change, right? Like, how often does that work? That just puts up people's rancor and makes them defensive. But if you can see them, hey, here's the goal that you said was important to us, to yourself, and I'm noticing some things that are getting in the way of us getting there quicker and better, and here's some of the feedback that I'd like to give you, then they're going to pay attention.
Yeah. I really care about you and your career, and I want you to be successful. I want the team to be successful, and I want to be as supportive as I possibly can of you. Right. And then share. Yeah. Very good, Bill. Thank you so much. Okay. Any last words of wisdom around courage or vulnerability, or anything from any of your books that you feel like are really important takeaways for folks? And I encourage everyone to all of his books are fantastic. So.
Well, I appreciate it. First of all, thanks for having me on, Karin. I appreciate it. And we've been wanting to do this kind of thing for a long time, and we'll do more in the future, I hope.
Yeah.
My final thing would be something that a Catholic priest one time told me years ago, and it's always stuck with me. He said, Bill, you're really loyal to your career, you're loyal to your family, you're loyal as a husband, and you give a lot to all of those things, but you don't seem very loyal to yourself. And he pointed out how, I was always in a constant state of disappointment with myself, what he called the divine discontent. Because I, felt like my relationships were here, but they needed to be here. I felt like career-wise I was here, but needed to be here. I felt like my income was here, but needed to be here. He said, the two words that you should hang on to are personal fidelity. It's not about being selfish. It's about being self-caring and self-respectful. And I would offer that to your listeners as well. Put your courage in the direction of personal fidelity. Honor your dreams. Honor your integrity, honor the values you say are dear to you and uphold them, and put your courage in that direction as you serve others, and you'll do great things. So be loyal to others, be loyal to yourself, make sure you have personal fidelity.
Oh, that is so fantastic. Thank you so very much. We are really delighted that you were here. So appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Okay. So that coming next, our next Asking for a Friend Live will be on November 6th. And I am really delighted about this one because this is what we're calling a BHRA reunion. So we were in Bermuda and speaking at the Bermuda Human Resource Conference, and these were the other speakers. So I've become friends with Laura Cole, Lee Rubin, Meredith McCradle, and we are going to be answering the question, how do I foster teamwork in remote environments? So I hope you all will join us for that nice panel live, Asking for a Friend. Thank you so much.